Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Before we get started, let's first get a quick check of the day's highlights. Korea's central bank keeps the benchmark interest rate unchanged for an 11th consecutive month at its first policy meeting with 4 new board members. As if the political mess weren't enough, Brazil faces an economic crisis and a challenging global event at home, while IMF research shows that corruption costs the global economy trillions of dollars. We take a look at some of the global business stories that made headlines this week. Korea's central bank has held its key rate steady at 1.5% for an 11th consecutive month. The decision comes amid mounting financial market stress as the government's corporate restructuring drive picks up ahead of steam. Our Shin Se-min has this report.
The Bank of Korea kept its key rate unchanged at a record low of 1.5% for the 11th straight month in May. The central bank appears to be leaving its options open after a board reshuffle late last month. Gloomy export figures and slowing domestic demand also pressured the Bank of Korea to leave its key rate as is. Korea's outbound shipments have been on a downward streak, falling over 11% in April from a year earlier and continuing their more than a year-long downslide.
Despite lingering uncertainties from in and outside of the country, the BOK has taken into account the fact that the domestic economy will moderately improve, and it will monitor any economic changes coming its way.
Even so, consumer and business sentiment showed signs of rebounding in the past month, although market watchers say the second quarter figures should be closely monitored. Given all of that, the central bank appears to have decided to continue its wait-and-see approach. Central Bank Governor Lee Ju-yeol is still under pressure to take action on monetary and fiscal policy to facilitate a government-led corporate restructuring scheme. However, there are still lingering market expectations for an additional rate cut given the slowing economy and uncertainties about the government restructuring plan. Shin Se-min, Business Daily.
In the event of a severe economic crisis, negative interest rates would not be completely off the table for the U.S. Federal Reserve. This is from Fed Chair Janet Yellen, who, however, emphasized the policy would only be used as a last resort. In a written response to questions from U.S. Congressman Brett Sherman on what the Fed plans to do in the event of another economic downturn, Yellen wrote negative rates could be employed in, quote, some future very adverse scenario. But she did add a wide range of issues would need to be addressed beforehand. The U.S. Fed has been slow to move on its rate hike trajectory after liftoff in December, while central banks in Europe and the Bank of Japan have resorted to negative rate policies to boost their economies. High-level officials from the government held a meeting here in Seoul on ways to boost the country's ICT sector. This comes a day after President Park Geun-hye chaired Korea's first strategic meeting for science and technology. Ari Kim Ji-yeon has this report.
During Friday's meeting led by Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn, 6 items, including the so-called K-ICT Strategy 2016 agenda, were considered and voted on. Under the strategy, the country plans to strengthen the links between 9 existing strategic projects seen as essential to the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Korea's technology and infrastructure related to the Fourth Industrial Revolution are still in their infant stages. The growth of new products and services in the field is limited, mainly due to regulatory barriers. In response, the government will establish strategic plans surrounding ICT to respond promptly to global changes.
The officials at the meeting also revised Korea's previous ICT strategy to include artificial intelligence and virtual reality technology. By 2019, the country aims to apply deep machine learning technology to systems for countering cyber terror threats. And by 2020, the technology will be used for smart systems for medical research. The government also has detailed plans to acquire smart software, including the linguistically smart exobrain and the visually intelligent Deep View, by 2018 in time for the Pyeongchang Olympics, which is seen as an opportunity to promote Korea's advanced ICT exports. By 2020, the country aims to increase Korea's ICT export volume to $210 billion from $126.4 billion last year. Kim Jeon, Business Daily.
Global mobile messaging app Line, created by Korean internet giant Naver, has taken the top spot in Google Play's top grossing apps list. According to data collected by App Annie, from the first quarter of 2012 to the first quarter of 2016, Line dominated the top 3 spots by revenue, with the main app ranking first, followed by Line Play and Line Manga. Korea's KakaoTalk came in 5th on the list, and by number of downloads, the Line Messenger app came in 7th. The list was topped by Facebook, WhatsApp Messenger, and Facebook Messenger. And according to the report, total global revenues increased by over 35 times and downloads by nearly 4 times in the first 3 months of this year compared to the same period in 2012. Volkswagen Korea might find itself in hot water again as prosecutors investigating the local office for emission standards violations have uncovered documents suggesting that it tampered with fuel efficiency tests as well. The Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office said VW Korea submitted test results to the government that are different from figures they received from the German headquarters. This led to an additional search and seizure at the Korea office this week by prosecutors. And if the allegations turn out to be true, Volkswagen Korea may face additional charges on falsification of private documents and obstruction of justice. The Korean movie market has been getting bigger and bigger over the years, hitting a new milestone in ticket sales last year. And our Lee Joo-young tells us that this has been catching the eyes of Hollywood film studios, who are now turning their eyes to greater potential.
Major film studios are pouring more interest into the Korean film market, and they're getting more hands-on about it too. For Fox International Productions, the movie-making arm of 20th Century Fox, the mystery thriller The Wailing is the 4th Korean-language movie it produced after entering the local market in 2012. The Hollywood film studio has invested over $6 million in net production of the film and will take on all marketing and distribution costs.
What I love about Korea as well is that it's actually easily the most progressive and the most creative and innovative theatrical market in the world. I mean, 4D was created in Korea.
Another major film company, Warner Brothers, has ambitious plans of its own to expand its presence in the Korean market. After 8 years of in-depth research, the studio said it will finance and distribute up to 5 Korean-language movies annually, starting with the 1930s period drama The Age of Shadows, set to premiere this year. Experts say this is good news for local directors and smaller production companies.
They can find different ways to secure production costs, meaning more good films can be put out, even if they fail to receive investment from Korea's 4 major distributors.
Korea has one of the most vibrant film industries in the world, being the 6th largest box office territory thanks to the large number of cinema-goers that stood above 200 million annually since 2013. It raked in roughly $1.4 billion in ticket sales last year, with even greater potential for growth down the line. Lee Joo-young, Business Daily.
It's Friday, and that means it's time for a look through some of the global business news that made headlines this week. For that, we're now joined by our Eunice Kim in the studio. Hello, Eunice.
Happy Friday.
All right, well, it's a historic day in Brazil as President Dilma Rousseff has now been unseated after both houses of parliament voted to proceed with impeachment hearings. Now, what's ahead?
Well, it does mark the end of her leftist Workers' Party 13-year rule, so certainly a start to a new era, perhaps, as centrist takes the helm temporarily for now, but highly likely for the rest of Rousseff's 2.5-year term. And there is plenty of work ahead. Take a look.
55 for, 22 against. Following over 20 long hours of marathon speeches, more than 2/3 of lawmakers at Brazil's Senate voted to place their head of state on trial for breaking budget laws. The now suspended President Dilma Rousseff has vowed a fight against what she called judicial farce, that is, her impeachment.
I may have made some mistakes, but I did not commit crimes. And worse yet, I'm being tried unjustly for having done something the law permits me to do.
The game-changing move comes as South America's largest economy, once a symbol of optimism in the region, has been battered by its worst recession in more than 100 years, with millions of Brazilians out of a job as inflation threatens to climb to double digits. Brazil's markets continue their weeks-long rally as second-in-command Michel Temer took the helm, a seasoned centrist negotiator widely viewed as business-friendly. He's named a slimmed-down cabinet, including a respected former central bank governor as his finance minister.
My first word to the Brazilian people is the word trust. Trust in the values that form the character of our people, the vitality of our democracy. Trust in the recuperation of our country's economy, our country's potential in its social and political institutions.
Confidence has been a rare commodity. Citizen demonstrations have reached fiery levels, protesting decisions that have questionable legality in the wider scope of the $3 billion Petrobras corruption scandal that touches the highest echelon of state and business leadership. Brazil has been the epicenter of the mosquito-borne virus Zika, and health experts have called the Summer Olympic Games in Rio to be postponed for fear of diffusing the outbreak, shown to be linked to severe birth defects and in worse cases can lead to paralysis or death. Worrying still, Rio has culled $550 million from its security budget, even though the state is to provide the bulk of security for the Games, now less than 100 days away.
I want to tell visitors to be careful. The situation is getting worse here. The police force is not operating and people are being shot to death.
But Brazil's organizers say the Olympic venues are 99% ready. And the IOC has completed its final official inspection with no changes.
The Olympic Games belong to Brazil. They belong to Rio de Janeiro and to all Brazilian people. I am certain that we are going to have a spectacular Games and participation of all involved.
Well, definitely a lot going on there in Brazil, but I hear the impeachment hearing could take as long as 6 months, which means the interim president, Michel Temer, will likely appear at the Games. So will Brazil be able to pull out of all its problems?
Well, the task ahead is daunting for sure. And in fact, just hours after that Senate vote, interim President Michel Temer said he'd work hard to win back investor trust to get the country back on its feet. And he'd start by overhauling Brazil's expensive pension system put in place by the leftist party. They had installed many social programs which were funded by a commodities boom seen in the early 2000s, much of which, of course, is now history. Important to point out, Temer is not entirely out of the woods himself. There are pending probes on him as well. Either way, pundits say Rousseff's ouster looks just about confirmed, since with yesterday's 2/3 vote, the opposition has the majority it needs to push her out of office indefinitely.
Well, corruption has been a hot topic indeed. I mean, this week, a searchable database was unveiled by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which opens up more details on the so-called Panama Papers. And also, the IMF has quantified the impact of corruption as well.
Right. It built upon earlier research by the World Bank. Now, the IMF is estimating the economic costs of bribery amounts to about 2% of global GDP. That is between 1.5 and 2 trillion US dollars every year. In its paper titled Corruption, Costs and Mitigating Strategies, the IMF said the indirect costs, such as lost tax revenues from tax evasion and lost economic growth as well, would push that figure significantly higher. Managing Director Christine Lagarde added, corruption is corrosive on society as it undermines trust and spoils the ethical standards of citizens. citizens. The paper comes ahead of an anti-corruption summit in London this week, led by UK Prime Minister David Cameron and attended by other world leaders. And finally, in auto news, Japan's Nissan is set to take a 34% controlling stake in scandal-hit Mitsubishi Motors, leveling up their alliance built over the past 5 years. The partnership, subject to regulatory and shareholder approval, was publicized on Thursday and is believed to be worth $1.8 billion. The two automakers are set to work together in areas such as technology sharing platforms and purchasing as well. This comes as Mitsubishi Motors announced more of its cars could be affected by incorrect mileage data after admitting last month it had falsified fuel economy data on at least 4 of its models. It adds that it was financially healthy and has enough cash to weather the storm.
Well, it sounds like it's definitely coming out of it better than Volkswagen, at least.
We'll keep our eyes on it for sure.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today, Eunice.
You bet.
And that wraps it up for today and this week. Thanks so much for staying with us throughout our program, and we'll be back next week with more business news that matters to you. Have a great weekend.